Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Cycle the Nation has taken a world record challenge to raise money for muscular dystrophy, and to support his efforts, I'm painting up a Space Marine to join him on the journey. The Marine will cycle along as Cycle the Nation visits every county in the UK on his bike. Using the colours of Muscular Dystrophy UK, the Marine I paint today will be attached to the bike, probably also setting a world record for being the first Space Marine to visit every county in the UK. At the end of the challenge, the Mini will be raffled off to raise money, so you can have a chance at owning a record-breaking Marine. Make sure you head over to the Cycle the Nation channel to keep up to date with the adventure, and let me know in the comments below how well you think a Space Marine will survive a journey like this. The first thing I've done is prime the Mini white. Because of the bright colours we'll be using, this will give a nice base coat to work off. For the power armour, I'm coming in with Troll Slayer orange as the main colour of MDUK is a bright orange. And with this I'm going to apply several coats all over the power armour to the Space Marine. I'm not worried about being neat, as any orange that gets over the other areas will be painted over in later steps, but I'm working in thin layers to slowly build up the coverage over the Space Marine. The coverage of this paint isn't fantastic, so it will take 3 or 4 coats to get a smooth, even finish all over the power armour. I'm just taking my time, making sure that I get paint into all of the recesses so there isn't any of the white primer showing on the model. As you can see, the coverage really isn't great, so that's why it's going to take several layers to slowly build up to that coverage all over the power armour. I'm also painting the backpack with orange as well, so this will be a really bright Space Marine, but should look fantastic as he's darting all over the country raising money for a good cause. After the first coat, you can see the coverage is very patchy on the power armour, so I'm going to come back with another coat until I get a good solid coverage all over the power armour. This second layer is going to build on top of the first, and after a few coats I should get a nice smooth orange colour all over the Marine. This step is going to take a while, but as the armour is so much of the model, it's worth taking the time to make sure that the base coat is as solid and smooth as possible. Next, with some Corvus Black, I'm going to paint all of the undersuit to the Marine. At this stage I'm being really careful around the power armour I've painted orange, as it will be hard to paint over the black. I'm catching all of the rib parts of undersuit that are showing from underneath the power armour. There are these ones on the legs, around the top of the legs as well. I'm always being careful to try and avoid getting this over the orange of the power armour. There are also some small parts showing by the belt as well, so I'm catching all of the undersuit with some Corvus Black. With the undersuit picked out, it's broken up that orange power armour a bit and added some more interest to the model. Next, I'm coming in with some Celestra Grey. I'm using this as a base coat for areas that I want to be white. White is the secondary colour of the MDUK logo, and Celestra Grey works really well as a base for white. So I'm painting the inside of the shoulder pads with Celestra Grey in a couple of layers to get a smooth, solid coat. I'm also going to catch the belt with Celestra Grey to add a band of white along the middle of the Mini. Celestra Grey is great for this job, as it can be shaded easily and then highlighted to give the impression of a pure white colour, as it's difficult to edge highlight a pure white base coat. I'm also picking out these straps on the back as well, as white is the secondary colour of MDUK. It works really well to break up the orange on the Space Marine. I'm going to pick out the Aquila on the chest as well. This is hidden a bit behind the bolt rifle, but it will still add that pop of brightness to the model, especially whenever Scott looks down and sees it while he's cycling. I'm being as careful as I can around the orange power armour, but as this is a bright colour, any mistakes can be tidied up easily enough. Finally, I'm picking out the wing skull on the bolt rifle. When I paint the rest of the casing in the next step, I'll have to be careful not to paint over any of the Celestra Grey. After a couple of layers of Celestra Grey, you can see I've built up to a solid light grey to these areas, so I can add some shades and highlights later and brighten these up to white. Next, with some Calgar blue, I'm going to paint the shoulder trim and gun casing. Light blue is the third colour used by MDUK, so I'm going to add it to the shoulder trim for that pop of blue, and it will make a nice accent colour to the marine. I'm being as neat as I can here, just catching the trim around the outside of the shoulder pads. As this is a layer paint, it may take a couple of coats to build up to a solid colour. I'm also going to paint the casing to the bolt gun with Calgar blue as well. I'm being careful around the Celestra Grey I already painted, but making sure I build up to a solid coat of Calgar blue all over the casing to the bolt gun. I'm also painting over some of the areas that will be painted as metal, because I find metallics look better when painted over darker colours, rather than pure white. After a couple of layers of Calgar blue, I've got a nice solid coat all over the shoulder trim and the bolt rifle. Now there's only one more base coat left to apply. And that will be painting the metal areas with some lead belcher. I'm going to paint all of the metal areas of the gun, so the barrel of the rifle, magazine and housing, all of the metal details. I'm catching with a couple of layers of lead belcher, being really careful for areas near the hands and things like that, trying to not get this over any of the details. I'm also painting these details on his helmet to break up that orange colour a little bit. And I'm catching the vents on the backpack with a couple of layers of lead belcher as well. There are these vents at the bottom of the backpack, and these ones at the top. I'm just catching these with a couple of layers of lead belcher. After the lead belcher has been applied and all of the metal details picked out, the next step is to shade the miniature. First of all, I'm coming in with some Wild Rider red, and I'm thinning this down with a lot of water. I'm adding water until the paint flows almost like a shade paint. I'm using Wild Rider red for this because it's between a red and an orange and should show up really nicely when applied to all the recesses of the power armour. Once I have the paint to the right consistency, I'm applying it to all of the recesses in the panels of the power armour. If at any time I come in too thick or it's pooling too much, I can wick it away with a dry brush, but also it should be easy enough to touch up with some Troll Slayer orange in any areas where I've come in a bit too thick. This step is going to take a while, but by applying this pin shade of Wild Rider red to all of the recesses of the power armour, it will really add definition, give the impression of shadow in all of the recesses, and hopefully really make the power armour pop. I'm making sure I apply this shade to all of the areas of the Mini, like between the fingers, and catching every line and detail between all of the parts of the power armour. I'm also making sure I shade the backpack as well, putting a thin line of this watered down Wild Rider red in all of the recesses of every detail on the backpack. Next, with some Known Oil, I'm going to shade everything else. For the shoulder pads, I'm applying a thin line of Known Oil right along the point where the trim meets the rest of the pad. This will give us a nice shadow on the shoulder pads. I'm applying this as an all-over shade over the Corvus black undersuit. This will sink into the recesses and darken them down, really giving some definition to these darker areas. I'm being careful here not to accidentally get any Known Oil over the orange power armour. I'm also doing an all-over shade to the straps I paint with Celestra Grey. And the belt as well, to add some shadow to the areas. We can brighten them up later with a highlight. I'm carefully catching all of the chest Aquila with some Known Oil as well, to add definition between the feathers of the wings, but being careful not to catch the power armour around the Aquila. Finally, for the bolt rifle and metallics, I'm applying an all-over shade, so this will sink into the recesses, darken down the surface a bit, and give the impression of a well-used bolt rifle. Darkening down the blue is okay here, as it will make it look slightly different from the blue on the trim, as well as add definition to the different parts of the bolt rifle. I'm also catching all of the metal vents on the backpack with an all-over shade of known oil. If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. If you would like to support the channel and become a member, please press the join button down below. After those shades have dried, you can see how they've added definition all over the Space Marine and really made the details on the power armour pop. So now it's time to start highlighting. For the first highlight, I'm coming in with some Fire Dragon Bright, and I'm going to apply this as an edge highlight to all of the power armour, the Space Marine. As the base coat is quite bright, this won't be the most dark edge highlight, but it will add some contrast with the darker areas from the recess shade, and give the impression of light catching the edges of all the panels of armour. I'm applying a thin line of Fire Dragon Bright to the edges of every panel, raised detail, and every detail of the power armour. Much like with the pin shade, this step will take a while, but the two steps work really well together to create a great looking power armour for the Space Marine. If at any point I come in a bit too thick with this highlight, I can paint over it again with some Troll Slayer Orange once it's dried, and it should cover it up, allowing me to keep nice even lines of Fire Dragon Bright on the edges of all the panels of the power armour. It's always worth spending a bit extra time on the helmet to a Space Marine, as this is the focal point of the Mini. I'm just making sure I keep my lines nice and even as I pick out all of the raised details on the helmet, especially near the eyes, which we'll be painting in the next step. I'm also making sure I catch all of the details on the backpack as well, catching all of these with a thin edge highlight of Fire Dragon Bright. With that edge highlight applied, you can see how it's added some brightness to all of the panels of the power armour, so the next step is to paint the eye lenses to the Space Marine. So for the eyes, I'm coming in with Thousand Suns Blue, and I'm carefully sinking this into the recesses of the eye lenses. This is a nice blue that will stand out from the orange and add a pop of colour to the eyes. Let me know in the comments down below, what do you think we should name this guy? He's going to go on this insane adventure around the country. I think he needs a fitting name. So let me know in the comments down below what you think we should call him. Then with some Temple Guard Blue, I'm carefully going to apply a thin line at the very bottom of each of the eye lenses. Temple Guard Blue is a really bright blue, so it will give the impression of light coming from the eyes. Finally, with some White Scar, I'm going to add a small spot at the very back corner of each eye. This small spot will give the impression of light reflecting in the back of the eyes. With the eyes picked out, that's really added some character to the model, and now he can see where he's going while on his bike journey. Next, with some Fenrisium Grey, I'm going to highlight the blue areas of the model. I'm applying a thin edge highlight to the outside edge of the shoulder trim. Where this is a sharp edge, I'm using the side of my brush to get a nice even line along the edge of the trim. For more difficult areas, I'm using the tip of my brush, making sure I keep an even pressure to get a smooth, even line along the trim. For the casing of the bolt gun, I'm carefully applying an edge highlight of Fenrisium Grey along all the edges of all of the details of the casing. I'm keeping these lines nice and thin, just catching the very edge of all of the details with a thin edge highlight. This highlight will brighten up the gun, especially after the shade has darkened it down, and give us a really nice bright blue rifle. Now with some White Scar, I'm applying a thin edge highlight to the belt. This will brighten up the Celestial Grey and make it read more like a white than the grey that we use as a base coat. I'm doing the same with the straps on the back, catching the raised areas with a highlight of white scar. I'm also doing the same with the Aquila on his chest, catching the raised details with some white scar, leaving the shade in the recesses. This will really brighten up the Aquila, give a pop of white on the chest, showing off the colours for MDUK as brightly as possible. I'm also doing the same to the one on the gun, leaving the shaded Celestia Grey in the recesses, but brightening up all of the raised parts. For the shoulder pads, I'm leaving the shade in the recesses. I'm going to paint a couple of layers of white scar all over the rest of the pad. This will take a couple of layers, but it will tidy up the shade and brighten up the shoulder pad. By working a couple of thin layers, we'll get a nice smooth white colour all over the central part of the shoulder pad as well, bringing it up to a nice pure white colour. With that white scar applied, you can see how it's really brightened up the areas we painted with Celestia Grey, and the model now has the pop of white that I was going for. Next, with some Mechanica Standard Grey, I'm going to highlight the undersuit. I'm just carefully applying a thin edge highlight to the top of all of the ridges to the undersuit. These areas are quite small, so I'm just carefully catching the very top of all of the ridges and applying a thin line of Mechanica Standard Grey to make these areas stand out. With the undersuit highlighted, there is only one more highlight left to apply, and that's to all of the metal details. For this I'm using Stormhose Silver, and I'm just going to catch all of the sharpest points on the details with a thin edge highlight. So it's things like the tip of the barrel here, sharp metal details, anything that light would catch, just to give the impression of light shining off of a metal surface. I'm also catching the vents on the backpack as well, just catching these with a thin edge highlight of Stormhose Silver. And with that highlight applied, that is how I painted a Space Marine in the colours of Muscular Dystrophy UK, ready to join Cycle the Nation on his adventure to cycle to every county in the UK. If you'd like to help support him by donating to this great cause, I've dropped a link to the fundraiser down below. I will also be donating all of the ad revenue from this video between now and the end of his adventure. Make sure you head over to the Cycle the Nation channel to keep up to date with his adventure and see this Marine as he makes his way across the country. And I will let you know when you can try and win this mini for yourself as well after his world record breaking attempt. Please let me know in the comments down below, how well do you think this Marine is going to survive his crazy adventure? Don't forget to like and subscribe. And as always, an extra special thank you to our Tea Lover channel member Jenkins, and happy painting and cycling.